chapter 32, verse 1. Now, as Yaakov went on his way, the angels of God, Malakei Elohei, met him. That's interesting. And when he saw them, Yaakov said, well, this is Elohim's camp. So he named that place Mahanaim, which means camps. All right, so if you recall back towards the beginning of this class in chapter 28, when Yaakov left the promised land, he had this experience at Bethel. Remember that? And he saw angels, Malakim, ascending and descending on this ramp. And at the top was the Lord. He had this vision into the heavens. It became like a heaven Wi-Fi hotspot. Well, here he's on his way back from this 20-plus year sojourn in the land of Abraham's birth, which is associated with Babylon. It wasn't exactly where Babylon is, but it's in the east. And he's coming back to the promised land. And sure enough, he sees angels again. So he's like, okay, so I'm going to name this camps, which kind of means like double camp. And I think that, so why would the authors bother telling us this? They're not just telling us this because it happened. That's not how biblical narrative works. Yes, it happened. That's the claim, for sure. But there's a lot of stuff that happened that they don't mention. These whole lives go by. There's gazillion incidents in these people's lives. Why would they care what Yaakov named this place at the moment? And I think one of the reasons why this is brought out here is to prepare the reader for what's coming. There's something going on in the spiritual realm with these angels, and there's this physical area that he is hanging out with. So there's like this bifocal lens that we're being invited to, where the incident that's coming, the couple of incidents that are coming, there's a physical thing that's happening, but there's also a spiritual thing that's happening. I think this is a literary clue. Pay attention that two things are going on here. And if you don't believe me, just keep reading because it's going to come out. Verse 3. Then Yaakov sent, what did he send? Yeah, you know what that word is in Hebrew? Malakim. It's the same word as angels. So there's angelic beings, like spiritual beings, in verses 1 and 2. And now in verse 3, these are not spiritual beings, these are just regular messengers. That's what the word Malakim means. But it's being used for both instances. You see, bifocal, there's two things going on here, a spiritual thing and a physical thing. This is going to get, this is going to get off the charts here in just a few sentences. Yaakov sent messengers ahead of himself to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. This is where Esau lives. He lives in Edom, which is supposed to flag in the reader's mind, oh, Edom, that's his second name, his nickname, Esau's, the brother that Yaakov cheated and deceived, etc., who wants to kill Yaakov, or did 20 years ago. I wonder how this is going to go. And now he's renamed, or he's given the second name Edom, which is in Hebrew the exact same letters as the word Adam. So the brother is a stand-in for the rest of the human family that is not Israel. And they have aught against each other, don't they? So Yaakov commanded them, that's the messengers, saying, all right, this is what you shall say to my lord Esau. Your servant Yaakov says the following, I have revided with Lavan, Uncle Lavan, great guy, and stayed until now. And I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my Lord, so that I may find chaim, grace, favor, in your sight. So, notice that the little description of all the things that he has, it's almost exactly the same as the list from Genesis chapter 12, when his father, or his grandfather, left Egypt. Except for one thing, camels are left out. And I think that this is significant. I think camels are being associated with the last appearance of camels in the narrative, which is when Rachel, his wife, used camel bag to deceive the saddle and so forth, to deceive Lavan. She was hiding household gods. Remember that? So I think this is a way of the narrators saying this is an authentic call out to Esau. There's no deception in this one. And so we're going to see a couple of instances in this story in which Yaakov acts out of character, that he's authentic and non-deceptive. It's mixed in with some other things that is more according to his character. All right, verse 6. The messengers, the Malachim, returned to Yaakov saying, "Hey, we came to your brother Esau, and furthermore, he's coming to meet you." And 400 men are with him. And Yaakov was greatly afraid and distressed. And so he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two companies. For he said, if Esau comes with the one company and attacks it, then the company which is left will escape. So the messengers, they say he's coming with 400 men, but the text is a little bit ambiguous as to what Esau's intent is. Based on Yaakov's reaction, his assumption of the intent, excuse me so much, is that it's violent an intent, isn't it? He's bringing 400 people with him, 400 dudes. It's a war party. So Yaakov manipulates the physical realm, just like he said, oh, two camps. Now he really is dividing into... Thank you, Crystal. Thank you. That is so kind. So now he really is dividing this realms to protect himself so he doesn't lose everything. If the one camp is attacked, at least he's got half left. Then Yaakov said, this is another genuine moment. This is a prayer. Okay, do you remember Yaakov's first prayer? Remember that from a couple weeks ago? Oh Lord, oh God of my father and my grandfather, if you will do this, and this, then, I'll give you some worship. Remember that one? That was at Bethel. Just pay attention to the change of tone here. Yaakov said, Elohim of my father Abraham and Elohim of my father Yitzhak, Yahweh, who said to me, return to your country and to your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I'm unworthy of all the favor and all the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. With my staff I cross this Jordan. I become two companies. Save me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. I fear him. He'll come and attack me, and the mothers, the children. You said, I will assuredly make you prosper and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be counted. So going from this prayer 20-some years ago, where he laid all these conditions on Yahweh, now he's just at the mercy of Yahweh, and he's humble, isn't he? This, I am unworthy. Can you imagine this coming from his lips 20 years ago? This is a complete change of character. However, be careful. Um, the way we want the biblical narrative to go is, okay, this is a bad guy, and then he had a moment, and now he's a good guy. And that almost never happens in a biblical narrative. What we see instead is this is a complex guy. And Yahweh is doing works in this complex guy over a lifetime. All right. Note that he's not just praying for himself this time. He's praying for the moms and the kids. He is not only thinking of himself. I just love this prayer. This is so awesome. And it gets better in a little bit. So he spent the night there. And he selected from what he had with him a gift for his brother Esau. 200 female goats, 20 male, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, 10 male donkeys. And then he placed them in the care of his servants, every flock by itself. And he said to his servants, okay, pass on ahead of me, put a space between flocks. And he commanded the one in the front, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? To whom do these in front of you belong? You shall say, belong to your servant Yaakov. It's a gift sent to my lord Esau. And behold, he's also behind us. And then he commanded the second and the third and all those who followed the flock, saying, in this way you shall speak to Esau when you find him, and you shall say, behold, your servant Yaakov is also behind us. For he said, I will atone with him, I will appease him with the gift that goes ahead of me. Then afterward I will see his face, perhaps he will accept me. So the gift passed on ahead of him while he himself spent that night in the camp. So he prays for salvation. There's a few things going on here. I like the fact that he's got a plan to love his enemy. I like that. It's a good reflection. The enemy happens to be his brother, but he's got this plan to give gifts of grace to his brother who is his enemy. Remember from Genesis chapter 10 when it shares about all the families that go from Noah's 3 sons? The point of that is, yeah, all the people on the earth, we're really family. We're family. We're family that has estranged in many cases from each other, but every last human being is part of the same family. So, and the gifts are arranged in an interesting way. We've got goats, donkeys, sheep, cattle. In the middle, we've got camels. So that raises a question. If camels are a little bit of a Easter egg for possible deception coming up, is there something in this gift giving which could be or is a little bit deceptive? Is he just trying to pay him off for favor? Is that an element? We don't know yet, and I don't know that we'll fully know, but it's a question that the writers are trying to bring in our minds. So he is potentially trying to bribe his brother with these gifts and get his favor. And notice who is coming last. All these servants and goods are going first, and Yaakov is in the back of the line. Verse 22. Now he got up that same night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female slaves, and his 11 children, and crossed the shallow place of the Yabok, that's a river. And he took them and sent them across the stream. And he sent across whatever he had. This is huge in the mind of the ancient Israelite reader. They just crossed a river. The crossing of water is an image of going into a new creation. If you recall, that's what happened on day 3, right? The land emerged from the chaos waters. And what happens with the potentially very first readers of this, they had just experienced this with the Red Sea, right? So, and eventually under Joshua, they crossed the Jordan to enter into the Promised Land. This is his river crossing into new creation, except he's not crossing. He sends his family, and he's still on the other side of the river. I think the idea here, and baptism comes from this image, by the way, but I think the idea here is he's not ready to cross into this new life quite yet. Something has to happen. Something has to happen. Something is unresolved that we're about to see resolved. Then Yaakov was left alone. Now, if this were a movie, which it's not, but if this were not a text, but were a movie, I think we would see the camera pan out and this lone figure, all his stuff and all of his family is on the other side of the river, and here he is remaining, and it's panning, and it's dark, it's night, and you know, we're just going to head on to the next scene in the next morning. But strangely, the camera work doesn't go the way you think, and just as we're fading, it starts to zoom back in on him, and the moonlight is shining because something happens when there's supposed to be a dead space, and that is something that happens at night. Second part of the verse. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. I love how that's just thrown in there so quickly. A man, whoever this man is, wrestles with him until daybreak. So who is this man? Yaakov definitely has his answer a little bit later. But in biblical literature and also in ancient literature, and not just ancient Near Eastern literature, when a man is thrown in there at a key moment, it usually signifies something supernatural going on. Not always. But if it just says a man, and the man shows up from nowhere in a story, often in ancient literature, it's a way of saying, yeah, it's not just a guy. There's something else. And for sure in biblical literature, this is going to happen again, briefly, not as dramatically, in the Yosef story that we're about to read in a few weeks. So they're wrestling. This word for wrestling comes from Hebrew, the Hebrew word avak, which literally means dusting. This is a dust-up. This is not like Olympic wrestling, right? Where it's like, okay, here are the rules, y'all, and then, point, okay, take a break, now start again. It's not that. They don't even know what that is. But this is not at all what this idea conveys here. It's also not professional wrestling. Some of you have seen professional wrestling. This is not that. This is, do you remember in high school when you would hear somebody yell, "Fight, fight," and everybody runs up to see the fight, and these two guys, in this case guys, right? And what does it look like? They're wrapped around each other, they're throwing their arms, they're rolling around on the ground, there's dirt flying everywhere. You remember this. It's a dust-up. And it lasts all night. And I like the mention of the word daybreak here because that's another creation signal, is something is happening to lead this guy, hopefully, into new creation. Whoever this man is, he's giving this heel grabber an opportunity to be remade. Well, let's see how it goes. Verse 25. When, and it's talking about the man here, saw that he had not prevailed against him, Yaakov, he, that's the man, touched the socket of Yaakov's hip. And the socket of Yaakov's hip was dislocated while he wrestled with him. And then he, this is the man, said, "All right, let me go. Dawn's breaking." What? What just happened? Let me try to help. First thing that is like confusing, if this is a spiritual being or the spiritual being, how did the man not prevail against Yaakov? That's not how the story is supposed to go, right? This whole wrestling match all night is the life story of Yaakov in miniature. Let me just introduce it with that, and I'll try to explain. Yaakov is not going to be remade in this wrestling match. He keeps fighting. So this man, he touches, and the word there is the same word used for strikes. Okay, this is not like, I don't think it's this. This is a heavy-duty touch, if you will. It's the same word used in Genesis 12 when Yahweh struck Pharaoh with plagues. So it's a strike. And he does so in such a way. All right, so I think there's a little bit of a translation challenge here that I'm going to bring to your attention. If you'll go back to verse 25, he touched or struck the socket of Yaakov's hip. Translators of different versions have struggled with this to figure out what words they should put here. The word that the New American Standard and the NIV have chosen to use for hip is hip, English in translation. Any other time that it's used in Scripture, it means thigh. Thigh. The reason that they chose hip is because of the dislocation aspect. But I go with the ESV and the King James and others in this particular case. I think the idea here, in fact, I'm 98.5% sure, is thigh. I think it's talking about the hollow of the thigh. That's how you'll see it rendered in ESV and King James and others. So in order to dislocate a hip out here, where would you have to strike? This is a groin hit. This is a crotch shot. Right in the crotch. Strong enough to dislocate, his joints here. It's a serious deal. Now, why would the man do such a thing? It's interesting that there are no more conceptions after this. 11 children are born. Many scholars believe that Benjamin, the last son, is that Rachel is pregnant with him at this moment. And that's it. No more kids mentioned in the text being conceived. So, all right, let's look into this a little bit more deeply. He says, let me go, the dawn is breaking. If we conceive of this as, Yaakov's not surrendering, he is going to keep wrestling, he's not going to give in ever. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to prevent all of this insanity that's been going on in your life and in your family from continuing with you personally, and we're going to proceed from there. And how we're going to prevent that is we're going to take away your ability to have more children. There is precedent for this in the Genesis story already. Do you remember how Yahweh predicated his covenant with Abraham? The chapter after Abraham used his male member in such a way to oppress, along with his wife, their Egyptian slave. And Yahweh's like, okay, this is what you're going to do. The thing that you used, to not trust me and oppress this Egyptian woman, you're going to have to cut that. That's how our covenant will be cut. And forever and ever, every generation. So this is something similar going on here, I believe. Yaakov has been in this matter of power plays and deceptions, all relating to his own lineage and how it's going to continue, basically deceiving his brother, taking advantage of his brother's impulses to get the birthright and then deceiving his father to get the blessing. This is all for his future generations. And then the future generation is a mess. Got these two competing wives, and each of them offering their servant girls, and it's a mess. And here we have no more Yaakov. But Yaakov said, oh, I'm not going to let you go, or I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. It's probably more what it sounded like. The purpose of this whole dust-up was for Yaakov to surrender so that Yahweh's blessing would be fulfilled on Yahweh's terms. And Yaakov won't. He won't surrender. Yaakov has therefore been prevented from being fruitful and multiplying further, but he still wants the blessing. This is the crux of the point here. Yaakov does want Yahweh's blessing. He just wants to earn it. He wants to fight for it. He wants to struggle for it. He wants to get it by, wrestling with people and wrestling with God himself. Yahweh is like, you've got the blessing, dude. You're going to get this as a gift. You do not have to struggle. Surrender and just receive it. And Yaakov is like, no, I'm not going to do that. I have to struggle. You see what's happening here? So Yahweh is like, got to give it to you, man. Okay. You have prevailed. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. So he, this is the man, said to Yaakov, what's your name? And he said, Yaakov. And he said, yeah, your name shall no longer be Yaakov, but Yisrael. Because you've sarat with Elohim and with men, and I got to give it to you, man. You've won. You're going to have it your way. You prevailed. A few things here. Why did the man ask Yaakov his name? Is it because he didn't know his name? As you've already seen in Genesis, that's usually not what questions are about. Whether it's Avimelech, whether it's Pharaoh, whether it's Yahweh himself, in many places in Genesis already, questions are asked to give the respondent an opportunity to come clean. And many times we have seen so far in Genesis, they don't come clean, right? They blame someone else or whatever. But in this case, the question is, all right, what's your identity, dude? And Yaakov comes clean. He says, yeah, I'm heel grabber. I'm supplanter. So this man says, no, yeah, new name, Yisrael. Sarah is this word, root for Yisrael. You may have heard, and this is a long-standing teaching, that what this name means is Prince of God. Has anyone ever heard that? Okay. I don't think that's what's happening here. You can get to Prince of God in like several moves, linguistically, but at its root, that's not really what Yisrael means. The same word is being used in Yisrael, because El being God, for the word wrestle, or contend, or struggle. This name at its base point means struggles with God. Yeah, you're not grabbing heels, you're struggling with God. For you have sarita, or you have struggled, with Elohim and with men. Here's the result. The result is you prevailed. You're not going to have any more kids. Okay, so this name conforms to the essential character of this man, renamed Yisrael, throughout his story. But the biblical authors are winking at the reader. Remember, the biblical authors are Israelites. They're descendants of Israel. I think the point that they're making to their readers, who are also Israelites, is, and isn't this what we've been doing our whole history up until the time of Moses and prophetically way beyond? We've been given this gift, and yet we seem to want to struggle for what we've been given as a gift and wrestle with God and with people. And all you have to do is read 1st and 2nd Kings, and you see this going on all over the place in the story of Israel. Gordon Wenham. Names throughout Scripture are significant, but changes of name in midlife are especially so. Here, Yaakov's new name was to become the nation's name, and it is fraught with significance. Yisrael, God fights or rules, is here reinterpreted as a reference to Yaakov's struggle with God. Yet this reinterpretation captures the paradox of Yaakov's struggle precisely. For while Yaakov struggled with God, it was God who allowed Yaakov to triumph in the fight. Yaakov's experience at the Yavok, this river, wrestling with God and yet surviving, was in later times seen as prefiguring the national experience. Hosea talks about this. Running through the Psalms of national lament, there's a similar conviction that the nation's trials are heaven sent, yet only from heaven can they look for deliverance. So this story of Yaakov's struggle with God summed up for Israel their national destiny. Among all their trials and perplexities in which God seemed to be fighting against them, he was ultimately on their side. Indeed, he would triumph, and in his victory, Israel would triumph too. I want you to notice how if this man really is Yahweh in the flesh here, that Yahweh intentionally is giving him through this whole night an opportunity to surrender, but he's not taking away his autonomy. The one thing that he doesn't take away from Yaakov is his own choice. And Yaakov asked the man, said, well, please tell me your name. But the man said, so why is it you ask my name? As if the man knows why he's asking. In the ancient Near East, the daily life of a person was surrounded by ideas of supernatural entities all over the place. To the ancient people of this time, not just to Israelites, but the ancient people at the time of Yaakov certainly, there were gods everywhere. I mean, you had the big national gods, of course, this people, that people, but you also had your household gods. There were gods for this, there are gods all over the place, like mosquitoes, right? But, they had powers. They had powers that extended beyond human ability. So the idea is, how do I get this God's attention, who, maybe will give me the time of day, maybe won't, so that I can get stuff done. I can have better crops, I can have this or whatever it is. Well, one of the main ways you could do that is by knowing the God's name and use that name for leverage to get whatever it is that you wanted. Well, I think that the idea here is that this man knows that Israel is not ready to hear exactly who he's contending with, not ready to know the name. So Yaakov named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen Elohim face to face, yet my life has been spared. Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Peniel. And, he was limping on his hip, as you can imagine. Therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel do not eat the tendon of the hip, which is on the socket of the hip. This is referring to like the sciatic nerve and surrounding. Because he struck the hollow of Yaakov's thigh in the hollow of his thigh. So at this point, Yaakov knows this is not just a man. You remember the men who visited Abraham? There were 3 men. They weren't. They weren't men. Yaakov insists, I'm going to do this my way, even though he comes face to face with Elohim. And as a result, he's lame. Is he still chosen? Yep, he is still chosen. The biblical authors do not place whether or not Yaakov is chosen, it's not on the scale. Let's see how he behaves, and then we'll determine if he's chosen or not. God is not saying that. That's not what the biblical authors are saying. Biblical authors want us to see is the chosenness has already been given. Yaakov seems to have difficulty with receiving this. Dr. Tim Mackie, in his very deep study of these chapters, he doesn't go to the Joseph narrative, but these Jacob stories, which, by the way, if you want to do a deep dive, graduate level, you can take his class for free on the Bible Project Classroom. I like one of his quotes, which is, "This story is a vivid image of God's journey with humanity as a whole and with his chosen people in particular. God's purpose is to bless, and that purpose keeps bumping up against humanity's inability to trust God's generous intentions. Instead, Yaakov keeps scheming as if the ultimate blessing is up to him, as we shall see. Then Yaakov raised his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 slave women. He put the slave women and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Yosef last. But he himself, it's a good thing, he passed on ahead of all of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother." So you see, he's got 2 things wrestling within him. In the one sense, he's dividing everybody according to his favorites, but then he exposes himself to the most danger. And he bowed 7 times. This is obviously a 7 days of creation, heaven and earth sort of appeal. So then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. And they wept. Okay, so the reader, for the first time, is all ready for a repeat of Cain and Abel here, except on a bigger scale because, the Cain figure has much more reason to despise the Abel figure. But suddenly the plot twists. There's something completely different going on here. Yaakov struggles with God, but God's like, no, we're going to use your family. And how? This is going to be revealed in the story of the next generation. We focus on 2 completely different sons among the sons. That's in a couple of weeks. But verse 5. So he raised his eyes, this is Esau, and saw the women and children and said, "Who are these with you?" And he said, "The children whom Elohim has graciously given your servant." Then the slave women came forward with their children, and they bowed down. And Leah likewise forward with her children, and they bowed down. And afterwards, Yosef came forward with Rachel, and they bowed down. And he said, what do you mean by all this company which I have met? So Esau's going, what are all these people? And Yaakov said, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. But Esau said, I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have be your own. And Yaakov said, no, please. If now I have found favor in your sight, accept my gift from my hand. For I see your face as one sees the face of God. You see the parallel? He just said he saw the face of God in the wrestling match. So what's happening here? Now there's a new wrestling match introduced. Esau wants to, it's like, no, keep all this. I'm giving you my affection as a gift. And Yaakov is like, no. I'm going to pay for this. he won't just receive the gift of Esau's forgiveness. That's one of the things happening here. You see that? It's the same thing. He's not going to surrender and just receive the blessing from Yahweh. He's got to wrestle with him and not give up. So please accept my gift, which has been brought to you because Elohim has dealt graciously with me because I have plenty. So he urged him, and he accepted. You know, Esau's like, all right, you prevail. So anyway, let's skip down to verse 12. Esau said, let's journey on and go, and I will go ahead of you. But Yaakov said to him, about that. So, you know, my Lord knows children are frail. The flocks and herds are nursing little baby lambs, you know. And they're a matter of concern to me. And if they're driven hard one day, they'll all die. So please, let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I'll proceed at my leisure, and the pace of the cattle that are ahead of me, pace of the children, until I come to my Lord at Seir. So Esau wants Yaakov, let's join together as family. Come with me, I want to show you my digs. And Yaakov is like, you know, you 401 guys are so fast, and you know, we got little babies and nursing animals, and I think, you know, the kids, look at the kids. Look, they're scrawny looking, aren't they? And we got to go slow. We'll go. You know, we'll go up there, but just, you know, slower. So Esau said, oh, well, please let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. He's like, oh, we can help. But he said, oh, what need is there of that? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. And Yaakov followed, and they had a great family reunion. But Yaakov journeyed to Sukkot and built for himself a house and made Sukkot booths for his livestock. That's why the place is named Sukkot. So Yaakov is not fully rehabilitated, is he? He deceives his brother. It's like, yeah, we're going to follow. We're going to, you know, just go ahead. Let's go. Go somewhere else. This is like he had his finest moment, and now we're just back to Yaakov. You see what I'm saying? He's complex. Verse 18. Now Yaakov came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and camped before the city. And he bought the plot of land where he had pitched his tent from the hands of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected an altar there, called it El Elohe Israel. So this is the next phase of his lifelong journey. It's the land of Shechem, which, just prepare yourselves, next week is going to be some narrative trauma. He buys some land, builds an altar to God, calls it God, the God of struggles with God. I love that name. So in theory, this is a permanent home. It won't be, but this is theoretically what it will be. And how's this going to go? Are the people of Shechem, the Canaanites there, are they going to bless Yaakov and bless his family? And will Yaakov and his family bless the Shechemites? No. No, it's not going to go down that way. It's going to go down in an awful, awful, awful way. So next week, just prepare yourselves with a reading. Again, if you've got kids that are watching or you're bringing, just keep in mind that it's a mature week of study, but it's going to be extremely important to understand before we move on to the story of Joseph. So we're going to take just a couple of minutes here with our friends at the table. And I don't know if this is the sort of week where you have a bunch of reflections or not, but just in case.
As I get the thing, I'm like, what was I going to say? Well, two questions, or one first. Now I remember. Esau, he took the yoke, he broke the yoke by releasing that bitterness. That's always how I've seen it. That his blessing was that he would have the yoke, but then it would be broken. And he did that by releasing the bitterness, forgiving his brother when he could have. But what does it mean when it says that the slave women were wives? Because it's not the ceremony that makes them different from the first two wives, because, Isaac and Rebecca.
Yeah. Good point. Did you notice that in the text? That the slave women that he had children by are associated with the term wives. And yeah, I think that's a point that the biblical authors are wanting us to ask. It's like, wait, are they wives or are they slaves? Which is it? And then I think that there's a parallel question, and that is, are Rachel and Leah really being treated as wives? Or are they somewhat being treated as slaves? So I don't know that there's a concrete, well, this is their actual status, but I think it's worded that way intentionally so that we can ask questions just like you asked.
As always, Pastor Tim, it's always a blessing listening to what you have to share. One of the things that stood out to me in chapter 32 is how initially when Jacob was going, and it was an authentic request because it did not list the camels, but it wasn't until after he sees them and the 400 people coming that it then switches and it brings the camel back into play, as if he was going to be, like I think you said, bribing his brother with like the gift. The other thing that stood out to me is the constant wrestling of Jacob, because it reminds me of a lot of people probably today in culture. The constant wrestling, it's not so hard to receive the gift from Jesus, but yet a lot of people think they have to be at a certain status or do this or do that to accept it. So those are things. And then also, I thought a lot of Jacob's name, heel grabber, kept coming to play because it always seems like he was last, like he was at the end of the line before all of his family, or that he didn't want to go with his brother to be receptive. So that kind of stood out as well.
Yeah, interesting. Even though the Lord changed his name, right? We've got a name change here. As we proceed in the narrative, most of the time he's going to be called Yaakov. It's as if he is, he's not ready to accept his new identity. Now, the new identity also recognizes his flaws, right? But it's definitely superior to heel grabber. And Yaakov has accepted it to a degree, this change, but to a degree, he hasn't. And that's the nature of this wrestling that he's doing, I think. So, do you feel like you've come to know Yaakov a little bit better in the last few weeks? And how this isn't a hero and it's not a villain. He's not a villain. He's just a guy. And I really think that he's a prime example of how the Bible works, is to present a mirror so that we can look at these biblical characters and not think, I'm going to be like him or I'm not going to be like him. Sometimes, but that's very rare. Usually the characters are for us to self-reflect. Say, yeah, you know what? Did God forgive me of all my sins? And do I act sometimes like he really didn't and I need to fight for forgiveness? Does anyone ever experience that? Striving and struggling to get something that Yahweh has already just said, no, this is yours. You can now walk in the freedom of my love and share that same thing with other people. But instead we're like, I gotta prove myself. I gotta fight. I really think that this is one of the main takeaways of the Yaakov story. And I think that Jesus and the New Testament authors are totally keyed into this aspect of it. And I think this is part of the reason that Paul makes such a point of salvation as a gift. It's a gift that's accessed by faith. It's not something that we earn, as Ephesians 2:8 and 9 says. Or else we could brag about it, say, I earned this. Ephesians 2:8 and 9. And then why were we saved? Ephesians 2:10, so that we could become good works machines and do great works. It's not how, we don't get saved by works, but we get saved for works. Isn't that cool? I'm sorry, I went into Ephesians there. But so Anna is going to pray us out. I just want to let you know that this is a strange chapter. It's strange to teach because there are aspects of it that are like, wait, this is not how I would think a normal moral of the story thing should go. But it's deep, isn't it? And you handled this so well, so I think you should give yourselves a hand.